When you think of Genghis Khan, you probably imagine fire, screaming, and endless horsemen thundering across the steppe. And yeah, you'd be right. But the truth is darker, much darker. Because Genghis didn't just fight wars, he engineered fear. He turned cruelty into policy and death into theater. And today, we're not talking about the great conqueror who reshaped the map. We're counting down the most terrifying things Genghis Khan ever did, ranked from brutal to monstrous to completely unthinkable. So buckle up. By the time we reach number 1, you'll understand why entire civilizations whispered his name like a curse. Number 8. Killing his brother over a fish. Every terrifying story has a beginning, and Genghis Khan started with dinner, or, more specifically, with one lousy fish. Back when he was just a boy named Temujin, life on the Mongolian steppe was brutal. His father had been poisoned, his family abandoned by their tribe, and survival meant hunting, foraging, and hoping you didn't freeze to death at night. In this world, food wasn't just food, it was power. One day, his half-brother Bektar snatched a fish Temujin had caught. Seems petty, right? Most kids would whine or throw a punch. Temujin? He calmly solved the problem by putting an arrow through Bektar's back. Problem gone. Dinner is served. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a childish tantrum. It was a message. Even at 14, Temujin understood a lesson he'd carry for the rest of his life. Survival belongs to the ruthless. Loyalty is rare. Mercy is weakness. And power comes from making sure nobody ever crosses you twice. Bektar became the first casualty in a career defined by blood. A fish fight turned into a murder, and that murder set the stage for the man who would one day drown the world in fire. Number 7. Executions as psychological theater. For most rulers, an execution is just punishment. For Genghis Khan, it was entertainment, and more importantly, a weapon. He didn't just kill people. He staged their deaths like a medieval horror show, designed to paralyze everyone watching. Take the governor of Otrar, for example. The man made the very bad decision of executing Genghis Khan's trade caravan. A dumb move considering diplomatic immunity under Genghis usually meant, don't do this if you value your life. When Otrar finally fell, the governor didn't just die. No, he got a front-row ticket to Genghis's creativity. Molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. Think of it as the Mongol version of see no evil, hear no evil, except, permanent. And that wasn't a one-off. Nobles were crushed beneath horses, while crowds were forced to watch. Others were executed in bizarre, inventive ways reserved only for the elite, because if you had status, your death had to be spectacular. This wasn't sadism for fun. It was a strategy. When word spread of these punishments, whole cities surrendered without a fight. People weren't afraid of losing a battle. They were afraid of what would happen after. In Genghis Khan's world, death was inevitable. But how you died? That was the nightmare. And he made sure everyone knew. Disobedience wouldn't just cost you your life. It would make you the next showpiece in his theater of terror. Number 6. Wiping cities off the map. For most conquerors, taking a city meant taxes, tribute, maybe a few new palaces to brag about. For Genghis Khan, sometimes it just meant delete. Entire cities, scrubbed off the map like they never existed. Take Nishapur, for example. The city made one fatal mistake, killing Genghis Khan's son-in-law during a rebellion. Bad call. His daughter demanded revenge, and the Mongols delivered it with enthusiasm. When the city finally fell, every man, woman, child, dog, and cat was rounded up and slaughtered. Then they built giant pyramids out of the skulls. That's not urban development, that's psychological warfare at its finest. Or look at Urgench. It was one of the richest cities in Central Asia. Keyword was. The Mongols struggled to capture it. So when they finally did, they unleashed hell. Some sources say the massacres lasted for weeks. The city was torched, the survivors scattered, and its wealth carted away. To this day, Urgench is a ruin, and its name, a whisper. This was the Khan's message: resist me once, and your city won't just fall, it will vanish. And here's the real genius word of these massacres traveled faster than his horsemen. Cities miles away heard the stories, panicked, and surrendered without a fight. Genghis didn't always need to swing his sword. Fear did the work for him. In the end, the Mongol Empire wasn't just built on conquest. It was built on erasure, the art of making entire civilizations disappear. Number 5. Inventing medieval biological warfare. Most armies brought swords, bows, and maybe a few siege engines. Genghis Khan's heirs? They brought plague corpses. Yeah, when regular warfare wasn't horrifying enough, the Mongols decided to weaponize death itself. Picture this: you're hiding behind the thick walls of your city, thinking you're safe. Then, suddenly, rotting, disease-ridden bodies start flying through the air and crashing down inside the gates. Not stones, not fire, just freshly dead people hurled by catapults. Congratulations, now your city has a front-row seat to the world's first biological weapons program. One infamous case happened at Kaffa in 1346, when Mongol forces flung plague victims into the besieged city. The disease spread like wildfire. Some historians even suggest this act helped ignite the Black Death that later killed a third of Europe. Imagine being so good at war that you accidentally wipe out half a continent you didn't even conquer. Efficiency at its finest. This wasn't just brutality, it was innovation. While Europe was still figuring out how to boil water without catching dysentery, the Mongols were pioneering medieval germ warfare. It turned every siege into a horror show. Defenders weren't just worried about arrows, they were worried about invisible killers, creeping through the streets long after the battle ended. The message was clear. You can bar the gates against an army, but you can't bar the gates against disease. And for Genghis Khan, terror wasn't limited to the battlefield it lived, in the air you breathed. Number 4. Using civilians as human shields. Most commanders protect their civilians. Genghis Khan, he weaponized them. During his campaigns against the Jin dynasty in China, he faced a problem: massive stone walls and heavily armed defenders who weren't exactly thrilled about letting the Mongols in. Traditional sieges cost too many soldiers, and Genghis hated wasting resources. So he came up with a new tactic, Karash, which literally means living shields. Here's how it worked. The Mongols raided nearby towns, captured civilians, men, women, children, and then shoved them to the front lines. Congratulations, you are now a piece of military equipment. Defenders on the walls had two options: don't shoot and let the Mongols through, or fire arrows into crowds of their own people. Imagine staring down at women who looked like your wife, or children the same age as your own, and realizing you had to kill them just to survive. But Genghis didn't stop there. Sometimes these captives weren't just human shields. They were forced to carry siege equipment toward the gates, knowing they'd be the first to catch the boiling oil, flaming arrows, or collapsing traps meant for the Mongol army. Talk about unpaid internships. This tactic wasn't just cruel, it was psychological carnage. Cities surrendered rather than face the horror of watching their own families slaughtered by their own hands. For Genghis Khan, civilians weren't collateral damage. They were weapons, and in his war machine, every life was expendable, except his own. Number 3. Using women as political weapons. When most rulers thought of wives, they imagined heirs, alliances, maybe a little romance if they were lucky. Genghis Khan? He thought of women the same way he thought of horses and arrows, as tools for empire. Marriage for him wasn't love, it was strategy. His wives were more than companions. They were political pawns, carefully placed across the chessboard of Asia. One was given to seal peace with a rival tribe, another to secure loyalty from a conquered clan. Even daughters weren't spared. They were married off to rulers, then used as regents, quietly running kingdoms in the Khan's name. On paper, they were wives, In reality, they were surveillance systems with royal titles. But don't mistake this for empowerment. These women weren't choosing power. Power was choosing them. If a local ruler betrayed the Khan, guess who became collateral damage? His daughter, his wife, or whoever had been tied into the marriage deal. For Genghis, people weren't family. They were leverage. And here's the twisted brilliance. It worked. Whole regions stayed in line because a Mongol princess sat on the throne, a daily reminder that the Khan's shadow stretched into every palace, every bedchamber. Behind the myth of the savage warlord was a man who understood one thing better than anyone else. Control doesn't always come from a sword. Sometimes it comes from a wedding ring. Number 2. Europe's worst nightmare. For centuries, Europeans told themselves scary bedtime stories about the apocalypse, plagues, demons, rivers of fire. And then the Mongols showed up and suddenly, the end of the world didn't sound so imaginary. In 1241, Genghis Khan's successors thundered into Poland and Hungary. At the Battle of Legnica, European knights armored, proud, and convinced of their superiority were crushed in hours. The Mongols didn't just fight harder, they fought smarter. They used feigned retreats, ambushes, and coordinated cavalry charges like Europe had never seen before. Whole armies collapsed before they even understood what was happening. Then came the Battle of Mohi in Hungary. Tens of thousands dead, rivers choked with bodies, villages turned to ash. Survivors described the Mongols as if they weren't human at all, more like a plague of demons sent to punish mankind. Priests declared it Judgment Day. Kings prayed in panic. Entire kingdoms are prepared to fall. And here's the chilling part. Nothing stopped the Mongols. No army, no fortress, no strategy could hold them back. Europe was seconds away from being erased like so many cities in Asia. And then, the Khan died. Ogedai's death in 1241 forced the Mongols to retreat, not because they were beaten, but because empire politics demanded it. Europe wasn't saved by courage. It wasn't saved by strength. It was saved by sheer luck and the grave of a single Mongol ruler. For a moment in history, the most terrifying force on Earth had Europe on its knees, and Europe knew, if they ever came back, it was game over. Number 1. Erasing an entire civilization. Most conquerors kill enemies, some burn cities, but Genghis Khan, he decided to delete an entire people from history. Near the end of his life, he turned his fury on the Tangut civilization in northwestern China. The Tanguts weren't strangers to the Mongols. They'd fought, negotiated, rebelled, and resisted for years. And in 1227, as Genghis lay sick and dying, he gave his final command: erase them. Not defeat them, not conquer them, erase them. His armies carried out the order with precision. Cities burned to the ground, libraries and records destroyed. The Tangut language and script were silenced forever. Their rulers executed, their people scattered. Survivors weren't spared, they were absorbed into other populations, their identity dissolved drop by drop. And here's the cruel genius. It worked. Today, almost nothing remains of the Tanguts. A few ruins, fragments of their script, whispers in dusty chronicles. An entire civilization scrubbed from existence because one man decided they didn't deserve to be remembered. Historians call it one of the first recorded genocides. Imagine hating someone so much that you order their memory itself to die. Genghis Khan didn't just kill people, he killed the idea of them. And that's why this stands at number 1. Because when you can make an entire nation vanish, not just from the earth, but from history, you stop being a conqueror. You become something far darker. Centuries later, the bones are gone, the fires have burned out, and the screams have faded into silence. But the shadow of Genghis Khan still lingers, not as a hero, not even as a conqueror, but as a reminder of how far human cruelty can go when nothing stands in its way. If history this dark unsettles you, remember this is only one story among many. Subscribe and step with me into the archives of horror that time tried to bury.